What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected legends sits down for what should be a routine late-night interview, only to discover the host has a hidden agenda that turns the entire conversation into a verbal battlefield? Tonight, we're diving deep into the explosive confrontation that left audiences stunned and Al Pacino walking off the Jimmy Kimmel Live set in disgust. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how not to treat a guest. And by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why Pacino had every right to be furious. Before we get into the shocking details, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about hosts who ambush their guests. The atmosphere in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio that evening was electric with anticipation. Al Pacino, the legendary actor known for his intense performances in films like Scarface, The Godfather, and Scent of a Woman, was scheduled to appear as the main guest. The audience was buzzing with excitement, expecting to hear stories from one of cinema's greatest performers. What they got instead was a front-row seat to one of the most uncomfortable and unprofessional interviews in late-night television history. As Pacino walked onto the stage, his signature confident stride carrying him to the guest chair, the audience erupted in applause. He looked distinguished in his dark suit, his eyes sharp and alert despite his 70-plus years. Jimmy Kimmel, dressed in his usual casual attire, greeted him with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm, but those who knew what was coming could detect something calculating behind his smile. Al Pacino, everybody, Kimmel announced to the cheering crowd. Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's truly an honor to have you on the show. Pacino settled into his chair, adjusting his jacket with the practiced ease of someone who had done thousands of interviews over his decades-long career. Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Good to be here. The interview started normally enough. Kimmel asked about Pacino's latest project, a streaming series that had been generating buzz in Hollywood circles. Pacino answered thoughtfully, his famous intensity dialed down to a conversational level as he discussed his approach to the character and what drew him to the material. The audience was engaged, hanging on every word from the acting legend. But then something shifted in Kimmel's demeanor. His questions became more pointed, more personal. Instead of focusing on Pacino's work, he began probing into the actor's private life in ways that seemed designed to make him uncomfortable. So Al, you've been married a few times, Kimmel said, his tone taking on an edge that hadn't been there moments before. Some people might say you have trouble with commitment. Is that fair? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Pacino's expression didn't change dramatically, but those who knew how to read him could see the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of his posture. He had been in this business long enough to recognize when an interview was taking a turn. I think that's a pretty reductive way to look at relationships, Ginny, Pacino replied, his voice measured but with an underlying current of warning. Life is complicated. People change. Circumstances change. I don't think anyone goes into a marriage expecting it to fail. But Kimmel wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed emboldened by what he perceived as Pacino's diplomatic response. But 3 marriages, Al. 3. At what point do you start to think maybe the problem isn't them? Maybe it's you? The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the lighthearted celebrity banter they had come to expect from late-night television. This felt more like an interrogation, and Kimmel seemed to be enjoying putting his guest on the defensive. Pacino leaned back in his chair, his famous intensity beginning to surface. You know what, Jimmy? I came here tonight to talk about my work, to talk about this new project that I'm passionate about. I didn't come here to be psychoanalyzed by someone who's never walked in my shoes. Oh, come on, Al, Kimmel said with a dismissive laugh that felt more mocking than jovial. You're a public figure. Your personal life is part of the package. The audience wants to know about the real Al Pacino, not just the characters you play. The real Al Pacino, Pacino repeated, his voice growing quieter but somehow more dangerous. You want to know about the real Al Pacino? The real Al Pacino has been working in this business for over 50 years. The real Al Pacino has given everything to his craft, has poured his soul into every performance. The real Al Pacino doesn't owe you or anyone else explanations about his personal relationships. The tension in the studio was palpable now. The audience was silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Kimmel, however, seemed to interpret Pacino's measured response as weakness rather than the controlled anger it actually was. But that's just it, isn't it? Kimmel pressed on. You hide behind these characters. You've made a career out of playing tough guys. But what are you really like when the cameras aren't rolling? Some people say you're actually pretty insecure. That all the shouting and intensity is just compensation. That was the moment when everyone in the studio knew that Kimmel had crossed a line from which there would be no return. Pacino's eyes flashed with a fire that his fans recognized from his most iconic performances. But this wasn't acting. This was genuine anger from a man who had been pushed too far by someone who clearly didn't understand or respect who he was dealing with. Insecure? Pacino said, his voice rising for the first time. You want to talk about insecurity, Jimmy? Let's talk about a host who thinks the only way to make his show interesting is to attack his guests. Let's talk about someone who's so desperate for viral moments that he's willing to disrespect people who've earned their place in this industry. The studio fell completely silent. Even the usually reactive audience seemed stunned by the sudden escalation. Kimmel, for his part, looked like he was realizing that his plan to create a memorable television moment was backfiring spectacularly. Oh, come on, I'm just trying to have a conversation here, Kimmel said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was clearly beginning to understand that he had underestimated his guest. A conversation? Pacino stood up from his chair, his full presence now commanding the stage. This isn't a conversation, Jimmy. This is an ambush. And I've been in this business long enough to know the difference. The studio lights seemed to burn brighter as Pacino remained standing, his presence filling the space in a way that made Kimmel look small behind his desk. The audience was transfixed, caught between their loyalty to their regular host and their growing realization that they were witnessing something extraordinary from one of Hollywood's most revered actors. Kimmel tried to salvage the situation with forced laughter. Hey, Al, sit back down. We're just having fun here. The audience loves this stuff, right? He gestured toward the crowd, but the response was muted at best. Even his most devoted fans could sense that something had gone wrong. Fun? Pacino's voice carried the weight of decades in the entertainment industry. You think humiliating your guests is fun? You think trying to tear down someone's reputation for cheap laughs is entertainment? Look, Al, you're being a little dramatic here, Kimmel said, and immediately regretted it. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Pacino had built his career on. Dramatic? Pacino turned to face Kimmel fully, and for a moment, everyone in the studio could see exactly why this man had become a legend. You want dramatic. Jimmy, I'll give you dramatic. I've spent my entire life studying human nature, understanding what makes people tick, bringing truth to fiction. And what I see sitting behind that desk is someone who's forgotten what this business is really about. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Come on, this is getting a little heavy for a late-night TV. Don't you think? Heavy? Pacino laughed. But there was no humor in it. You want to keep it light? Then, why did you spend the first 10 minutes of this interview trying to dig into my personal life like some tabloid reporter? You had one of the greatest actors of all time sitting in that chair. And instead of asking about craft, about art, about the 50 years of work I've put into this industry, You chose to go for the cheapest shots you could find. The camera operators were having trouble deciding where to focus. This wasn't the scripted back and forth they were used to capturing. This was raw, unfiltered confrontation between two very different approaches to entertainment. I was just trying to get to know the real you, Kimmel protested weakly. The real me? Pacino's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper that had made audiences shiver in darkened theaters for decades. The real me is someone who respects this craft, who respects the people who've paved the way, who understands that when you invite someone onto your show, you treat them with dignity. The real me doesn't need to tear other people down to build himself up. Kimmel was visibly sweating now, realizing that his attempt to create viral content had instead created a public relations nightmare. Oh, I think you're overreacting a bit. Here, overreacting? Pacino stepped closer to the desk. Let me tell you something about overreacting. Jimmy, overreacting would be me walking over there and showing you exactly what kind of tough guy I can be when someone disrespects me. What I'm doing right now is showing restraint. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This wasn't comedy anymore. This was a masterclass in commanding a room, in the kind of presence that couldn't be taught or faked. You know what your problem is, Jimmy? Pacino continued, his voice building in intensity. You've forgotten that the people who sit in that chair are human beings, not content for your highlight reels. You've forgotten that respect isn't something you give when it's convenient. It's something you give because it's right. Kimmel tried to interrupt. Oh, I never meant to. Done. Pacino's single word cut through the air like a blade. Don't give me empty apologies when we both know you meant every word you said. You came into this interview with a plan, didn't you? You thought you'd get the legendary Al Pacino to lose his temper, create some viral moment that would get your show trending on social media. The accuracy of Pacino's assessment was written all over Kimmel's face. The host looked like a man who had been completely outmaneuvered by someone operating on a completely different level. Well, congratulations, Jimmy, Pacino said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his theatrical training. You got your moment. But what you also got was a lesson in what happens when you underestimate someone who's been in this business longer than you've been alive. I respect your work, Al. I really do, Kimmel said desperately. Respect? Pacino laughed again, and this time it was genuinely incredulous. You have a funny way of showing respect, Jimmy. Where I come from, respect means treating people with dignity. It means honoring what they've accomplished, not trying to tear them down for entertainment. The production team behind the cameras was in panic mode. This was supposed to be a lighthearted interview to promote Pacino's new project, not a career. Defining moment of television drama. But they couldn't look away, and neither could anyone else in the studio. You want to know what I think, Jimmy? Pacino was in full command now, every eye in the building focused on him. I think you've gotten so comfortable behind that desk, so used to celebrities playing along with your games, that you forgot you were dealing with someone who doesn't need this show, doesn't need your platform, doesn't need anything from you. Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but Pacino wasn't finished. I've worked with the greatest directors in the history of cinema. I've shared scenes with actors who defined generations. I've been honored by every major institution in this industry. And you thought you could sit there and take cheap shots at my personal life like I was some reality TV star desperate for attention. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. What had started as Kimmel's show, his territory, his rules, had become Al Pacino's stage, and he was delivering a performance that no one present would ever forget. This is what happens, Jimmy, when you mistake kindness for weakness, when you confuse graciousness with desperation. I came here tonight as a professional, ready to have a real conversation about work I'm proud of. But you had other plans, didn't you? Kimmel looked around desperately, seeking support from his production team, from his audience, from anyone who might help him regain control of the situation. But everyone was transfixed by what they were witnessing. The silence in the studio was deafening as Pacino stood there, his presence dominating the space in ways that no amount of production value could match. Kimmel was trapped behind his desk, looking smaller with each passing second while one of Hollywood's most powerful personalities delivered what would become legendary television. You know what the saddest part about all this is, Jimmy? Pacino's voice had taken on an almost philosophical tone, but the underlying steel was still there. You had a chance to do something meaningful tonight. You had someone sitting in that chair who's lived through the golden age of American cinema, who's worked with everyone from Francis Ford Coppola to Martin Scorsese, who's seen this industry evolve from the inside. Kimmel tried once more to interject. "Oh, maybe we can start over." "Start over?" Pacino shook his head slowly. "That's the problem with your generation of entertainers, Jimmy. You think everything can just be reset, that you can say whatever you want and then apologize your way out of it when things go wrong. But some bridges, once you burn them, stay burned." The audience was witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a celebrity meltdown or a publicity stunt gone wrong. This was a master of his craft delivering an impromptu lesson on respect, professionalism, and the difference between entertainment and exploitation. "I've been in this business for over 50 years, Pacino continued, his voice carrying the weight of all those decades. "I've seen hosts who understood that their job was to bring out the best in their guests, to create moments of genuine connection with their audience. People like Johnny Carson, who knew that the conversation was more important than the controversy." Kimmel's face flushed red. Being compared unfavorably to Carson was perhaps the worst insult a late-night host could receive. And everyone in the room knew it. "But you, Jimmy, you represent everything that's wrong with modern entertainment. You think shock value is the same as talent. You think embarrassing people is the same as entertaining them. You've confused being provocative with being profound." The production team was frantically trying to signal to Kimmel, but he seemed frozen, unable to respond to what was becoming a complete dismantling of everything he thought he understood about television. "Let me tell you something about real entertainment, Jimmy," Pacino said, moving closer to the desk. "Real entertainment comes from truth, from genuine human connection, from moments that make people think and feel something deeper than just cheap laughs at someone else's expense." "I was just trying to," Kimmel began weakly. "You were trying to use me," Pacino cut him off. "You were trying to use my reputation, my name, my presence to create content for your show without giving anything back. That's not entertainment, Jimmy. That's exploitation." The power of Pacino's words was undeniable. Even the most loyal Kimmel fans in the audience seemed to be questioning their host's behavior as they watched one of cinema's greatest legends explain exactly why he had been wronged. "You want to know what's really pathetic about all this?" Pacino asked, his voice building toward what everyone sensed would be his final statement. "You had Al Pacino on your show. You had one of the most respected actors in the history of American cinema sitting right there, ready to share stories that your audience would remember for years. And you threw it all away because you thought cheap shots were more valuable than real conversation." Kimmel looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. The confident, wise-cracking host who had started the evening was gone, replaced by someone who clearly understood that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. "This is why the industry doesn't respect shows like this anymore, Jimmy," Pacino continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned his place at the very top of his profession. "Because you've forgotten that the people who built this business, who sacrificed everything to create the foundation you're standing on, deserve better than to be treated like props in your comedy sketches." The audience was completely captivated. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was a masterclass in dignity, in how to respond when someone tries to diminish you, and the difference between real power and artificial authority. I came here tonight with respect for this show, respect for you, respect for your audience, Pacino said, his voice now carrying a finality that everyone could hear. But respect has to be mutual, Jimmy. And what you've shown me tonight is that you don't understand the first thing about what that word means. Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Please, we can work this out. Pacino looked at him for a long moment, and everyone in the studio could see decades of experience, of wisdom, of understanding about how this business really works reflected in his eyes. No, Jimmy, we can't work this out. Because you don't understand what you did wrong, and until you do, nothing's going to change. You'll keep treating your guests like content instead of human beings, and eventually, someone else is going to stand up and call you out the same way I'm doing right now. With that, Pacino straightened his jacket and looked directly into the camera. For a moment, he spoke not to Kimmel or even to the studio audience, but to everyone watching at home. To anyone out there who's watching this, remember that respect isn't negotiable. Whether you're the biggest star in Hollywood or someone just starting out, you deserve to be treated with dignity. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Then he turned back to Kimmel one final time. Thanks for the reminder of why I usually don't do shows like this anymore, Jimmy. It's been educational. And with that, Al Pacino walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind one of the most powerful moments in late-night television history, and a host who would never quite recover from being completely outclassed by a true master of his craft. The studio remained silent for several seconds. After Pacino disappeared behind the curtain, Kimmel sat at his desk, visibly shaken, while his audience tried to process what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just a celebrity interview gone wrong. It was a defining moment that showed the difference between someone who had earned respect through decades of excellence and someone who had confused a platform with actual authority. So what do you think about what happened that night? Was Al Pacino right to call out Jimmy Kimmel's behavior? Or should he have just played along with the host game? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And make sure you subscribe for more stories about the moments when Hollywood's biggest stars refused to play by the rules.